Welcome to the Voxlore. Our channel produces immersive fantasy audiobooks for entertainment and storytelling enjoyment. All content, including narration, sound design, and storytelling elements, is created with passion for fantasy fans. The Crisis, by Winston Churchill. Part 3, Chapter 11. The Invitation. Mr. Eliphalet Hopper, in his Sunday-best broadcloth, was a marvel of propriety. It seemed to Stephen that his face wore a graver expression on Sunday when he met him standing on Miss Crane's doorstep, picking the lint from his coat. Stephen's intention was not to speak, but he remembered what the judge had said to his mother, and nodded. Why, indeed, should he put on airs with this man who had come to St. Louis unknown and unrecommended and poor, who by sheer industry had made himself of importance in the large business of Carvel and Company? As for Stephen Brice, he was not yet earning his salt, but existing by the charity of Judge Silas Whipple. "Howdy, Mr. Brice," said Mr. Hopper, his glance caught by the indefinable in Stephen's costume. This would have puzzled Mr. Hopper's tailor more. "Very well, thanks. A fine day after the rain." Stephen nodded, and Mr. Hopper entered the hours after him. "Be you asked to Virginia Carvel's party?" he asked abruptly. "I do not know Miss Carvel," said Stephen, wondering how well the other did. And if the truth be told, he was a little annoyed at Mr. Hopper's free use of her name. "That shouldn't make no difference," said Eliphalet with just a shade of bitterness in his tone. "They keep open house like all Southerners." Mr. Hopper hesitated. "For such as come well recommended." "I most forgot," said he. "I cal'late you're not any too well recommended. I most forgot that little transaction down to the courthouse. They do say that she wanted that gal almighty bad. She was most awful cut up not to get her. Served her right, though. I'm glad you did. Show her she can't have everything her own way. And say," he added with laughter, "how you did fix that there stuck-up Colfax boy. He'll never forgive you no more than she." "But," said Mr. Hopper meditatively, "it was a derned fool trick. I think Stephen's critics will admit that he had a good right to be angry, and that they will admire him just a little bit because he kept his temper." But Mr. Hopper evidently thought he had gone too far. "She ain't got no use for me, neither," he said. "She shows poor judgment," answered Stephen. "She's not long-sighted, that's sure," replied Eliphalet with emphasis. At dinner Stephen was tried still further, and it was then he made the determination to write for the newspapers in order to pay the rent on Mr. Brincemade's house. Miss Carvel's coming-out party was the chief topic. "They do say the Colonel is to spend a sight of money on that ball," said Mrs. Abner Reed. "I guess it won't bankrupt him," and she looked hard at Mr. Hopper. "I cal'late he ain't pushed for money," that gentleman vouchsafed. "He's a good man, and done well by you, Mr. Hopper." So, answered Eliphalet. "But I will say that I done something for the Colonel. I've saved him 100 times my pay since I showed old Hood the leaks, and I got a $1,000 order from Wright and Company this week for him. I dare say you'd keep a tight hand enough on expenses," said Miss Crane, half in sarcasm, half in approval. "If Colonel Carvel was doing business in New England," said Eliphalet. "He'd been bankrupt long ago." "That young Clarence Colfax," Mrs. Abner Reed broke in. "He'll get a right smart mint of money when he marries Virginia. They do say her mother left her independent." "How now, Mr. Hopper?" Eliphalet looked mysterious and knowing. He did not reply. "And young Colfax ain't precisely a pauper," said Miss Crane. "I'll risk a good deal that she don't marry Colfax," said Mr. Hopper. "What on earth do you mean?" cried Mrs. Abner. "It ain't broke off?" "No," he answered. "It ain't broke off, but I cal'late she won't have him when the time comes. She's got too much sense." Heavy at heart, Stephen climbed the stairs, thanking heaven that he had not been drawn into the controversy. A partial comprehension of Mr. Hopper was dawning upon him. He suspected that gentleman of an aggressive determination to achieve wealth, and the power which comes with it, for the purpose of using that power upon those beneath him. Nay, when he thought over his conversation, he suspected him of more, of the intention to marry Virginia Carvel. It will be seen whether Stephen was right or wrong. He took a walk that afternoon, as far out as a place called Lindell's Grove, which afterward became historic. And when he returned to the house, his mother handed him a little white envelope. "It came while you were out," she said. He turned it over, and stared at his name written across the front in a feminine hand. In those days young ladies did not write in the bold and masculine manner now deemed proper. Stephen stared at the note, manlike, and pondered. "Who brought it, Mother? Why don't you open it and see?" asked his mother with a smile. He took the suggestion. What a funny formal little note, we should think it now. It was not funny to Stephen then. He read it, and he read it again, and finally he walked over to the window, still holding it in his hand. Some mothers would have shown their curiosity. Mrs. Brice did not, wherein she proved herself their superiors in the knowledge of mankind. Stephen stood for a long while looking out into the gathering dusk. Then he went over to the fireplace and began tearing the note into little bits. Only once did he pause, to look again at his name on the envelope. "It is an invitation to Miss Carvel's party," he said. By Thursday of that week the Brices, with thanksgiving in their hearts, had taken possession of Mr. Brincemaid's little house. Chapter 12. Miss Ginny. The years have sped indeed since that gray December when Miss Virginia Carvel became 18. Old St. Louis has changed from a pleasant southern town to a bustling city, and a high building stands on the site of that wide and hospitable home of Colonel Carvel. And the Colonel's thoughts that morning, as Ned shaved him, flew back through the years to a gently rolling Kentucky countryside, and a pillared white house among the oaks. He was riding again with Beatrice Colfax in the springtime. Again he stretched out his arm as if to seize her bridle hand, and he felt the thoroughbred rear. Then the vision faded, and the memory of his dead wife became an angel's face, far, so far away. He had brought her to St. Louis, and with his inheritance had founded his business, and built the great double house on the corner. The child came, and was named after the noble state which had given so many of her sons to the service of the Republic. 5 simple, happy years then war. A black war of conquest which, like many such, was to add to the nation's fame and greatness. Glory beckoned, honor called, or Comyn Carvel felt them. With nothing of the profession of arms save that born in the Carvels, he kissed Beatrice farewell and steamed down the Mississippi, a captain in Missouri regiment. The young wife was ailing. Anguish killed her. Had Comyn Carvel been selfish? Ned, as he shaved his master's face, read his thoughts by the strange sympathy of love. He had heard the last pitiful words of his mistress, had listened, choking, to Dr. Postlethwaite as he read the sublime service of the burial of the dead. It was Ned who had met his master, the colonel, at the levee, and had fallen sobbing at his feet. Long after he was shaved that morning, the colonel sat wrapped in his chair, while the faithful servant busied himself about the room, one eye on his master the while. But presently Mr. Carvel's reverie is broken by the swift rustle of a dress, and a girlish figure flutters in and plants itself on the wide arm of his mahogany barber chair, Mammy Easter in the door behind her. And the colonel, stretching forth his hands, strains her to him, and then holds her away that he may look and look again into her face. "Honey," he said, "I was thinking of your mother." Virginia raised her eyes to the painting on the wall over the marble mantel. The face under the heavy coils of brown hair was sweet and gentle, delicately feminine. It had an expression of sorrow that seemed a prophecy. The colonel's hand strayed upward to Virginia's head. "You are not like her, honey," he said. "You may see for yourself. You are more like your Aunt Bess, who lived in Baltimore, and she—" "I know," said Virginia. "She was the image of the beauty Dorothy Manners who married my great-grandfather." "Yes, Ginny," replied the colonel, smiling. "That is so. You are somewhat like your great-grandmother." "Somewhat," cried Virginia, putting her hand over his mouth. "I like that. You and Captain Legay are always afraid of turning my head. I need not be a beauty to resemble her. I know that I am like her. When you took me on to Calvert House to see Uncle Daniel that time, I remember the picture by Sir Joshua Reynolds." "Yes, Sir Joshua. You were only 11, says the colonel. "She is not a difficult person to remember." "No," said Mr. Carvel, laughing. "Especially if you have lived with her. Not that I wish to be that kind, said Virginia meditatively. To take London by storm and keep a man dangling for years. But he got her in the end, said the Colonel. Where did you hear all this? He asked. Uncle Daniel told me. He has Richard Carvel's diary. And a very honorable record it is, exclaimed the Colonel. Ginny, we shall read it together when we go a-visiting to Culvert House. I remember the old gentleman as well as if I had seen him yesterday. Virginia appeared thoughtful. Pa, she began. Pa, did you ever see the pearls Dorothy Carvel wore on her wedding day? What makes you jump like that? Did you ever see them? Well, I reckon I did, replied the Colonel, gazing at her steadfastly. Pa, Uncle Daniel told me that I was to have that necklace when I was old enough. Law, said the Colonel, fidgeting. Your Uncle Daniel was just fooling you. He's a bachelor, said Virginia. What use has he got for it? Why, says the Colonel. He's a young man yet, your uncle only 53. I've known older fools than he to go and do it. And Ned. Yes, Marsa. Yes, Sue. I've seed 'em at 70. And shufflin' about pert as Moss Clarence's gamecocks. Why? Dar was old Moss Ludlow. Now, Mr. Johnson, Virginia put in severely, no more about old Ludlow. Ned grinned from ear to ear, and in the ecstasy of his delight dropped the Colonel's clothes-brush. Lawn's sakes, he cried. Ef she ain't recomembered. Recovering his gravity and the brush simultaneously, he made Virginia a low bow. Mornin', Miss Ginny. I sholy is gwinter esloot you dis day. Made a good Lord make you happy, Miss Ginny, and give you a good husband. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, thank you, said Virginia, blushing. How come she recomembered, Moss Coman? Dat's de quality. Dat's why. Don't you talk to Ned 'bout de quality, Marsa. And when did I ever talk to you about the quality, you scalawag? Asks the Colonel, laughing. Ain't none cept de best quality keep they word dat away, said Ned, as he went off to tell Uncle Ben in the kitchen. Was there ever, in all this wide country, a good cook who was not a tyrant? Uncle Ben Carvel was a veritable emperor in his own domain, and the Colonel himself, had he desired to enter the kitchen, would have been obliged to come with humble and submissive spirit. As for Virginia, she had had since childhood more than one passage at arms with Uncle Ben, and the question of who had come off victorious had been the subject of many a debate below stairs. There were a few days in the year, however, when Uncle Ben permitted the sanctity of his territory to be violated. One was the 7th of December. On such a day it was his habit to retire to the broken chair beside the sink, the chair to which he had clung for 25 years. There he would sit, blinking, and carrying on the while an undercurrent of protests and rumblings, while Miss Virginia and other young ladies mixed and chopped and boiled and baked and gossiped. But woe to the unfortunate Rosetta if she overstepped the bounds of respect. Woe to Ned or Jackson or Tato if they came an inch over the threshold from the hall beyond. Even Aunt Easter stepped gingerly, though she was wont to affirm, when assisting Miss Ginny in her toilet, an absolute contempt for Ben's commands. So Ben ordered you out, mammy? Virginia would say mischievously. Order me out. Hugh, think I see skeered o' him, honey? Reckon I'd frail him good ef he cotched hold of me with his black hands. Just let him try to come upstairs once, honey, and see what I say to him. Nevertheless Ben had, on one never-to-be-forgotten occasion, ordered Mammy Easter out, and she had gone. And now, as she was working the beet biscuits to be baked that evening, Uncle Ben's eye rested on her with suspicion. What mere man may write with any confidence of the delicacies which were prepared in Uncle's kitchen that morning? What mere man may write with any confidence of the delicacies which were prepared in Uncle's kitchen that morning? No need in those days of cooking schools. What southern lady, to the manor born, is not a cook from the cradle? Even Ben noted with approval Miss Virginia's scorn for pecks and pints, and grunted with satisfaction over the accurate pinches of spices and flavors which she used. And he did Miss Eugenie the honor to eat one of her pralines. That night came Captain Legay Brent, the figure of an eager and determined man swinging up the street, and pulling out his watch under every lamp-post. And in his haste, in the darkness of a mid-block, He ran into another solid body clad in high boots and an old army overcoat, beside a wood wagon. "Howdy, Captain," said he of the high boots. "Well, I just thought as much," was the energetic reply. "Minute I seen the rig I knew Captain Grant was behind it." He held out a big hand, which Captain Grant clasped, just looking at his own with a smile. The stranger was Captain Elijah Brent of the Louisiana. "Now," said Brent, "I'll just bet a full cargo that you're off to the planter's house, and smoke an El Sol with the boys." Mr. Grant nodded. "You're keen, Captain," said he. "I've got something here that'll outlast an El Sol a whole day," continued Captain Brest, tugging at his pocket and pulling out a 6-inch cigar as black as the night. "Just you try that." The captain instantly struck a match on his boot and was puffing in a silent enjoyment which delighted his friend. "Reckon he don't bring out cigars when you make him a call?" said the steamboat captain, jerking his thumb up at the house. It was Mr. Jacob Clumes. Captain Grant did not reply to that, nor did Captain Legay expect him to, as it was the custom of this strange and silent man to speak ill of no one. He turned rather to put the stakes back into his wagon. "Where are you off to, Legay?" he asked. "Lord bless my soul," said Captain Legay. "To think that I could forget." He tucked a bundle tighter under his arm. "Grant, did you ever see my little sweetheart, Ginny Carvel?" The captain sighed. "She ain't little any more, and she 18 today." Captain Grant clapped his hand to his forehead. "Say, Legay," said he, "that reminds me. A month or so ago I pulled a fellow out of Renault's area across from there. First I thought he was a thief. After he got away I saw the colonel and his daughter in the window." Instantly Captain Legay became excited and seized Captain Grant by the cape of his overcoat. "Say, Grant, what kind of appearing fellow was he? Short, thick-set, blocky face?" "I reckon I know," said Brest, bringing down his fist on the wagon board. "I've had my eye on him for some little time." He walked around the block twice after Captain Grant had driven down the muddy street, before he composed himself to enter the Carvel mansion. He paid no attention to the salutations of Jackson, the butler, who saw him coming and opened the door, but climbed the stairs to the sitting room. "Why, Captain Legay, you must have put wings on the Louisiana," said Virginia, rising joyfully from the arm of her father's chair to meet him. "We had given you up." "What?" cried the captain. "Give me up? Don't you know better than that? What? Give me up when I never missed a birthday. And this the best of all of 'em. If your pa had got sight of me shovin' in wood and cussin' the pilot for slowin' at the crossin's, he'd never let you ride in my boat again." Bill Jenks said, "Are you plumb crazy, Brent? Look at them cressets. $5, says I. Wouldn't go in for 500. Tomorrow's Ginny Carvel's birthday, and I've just got to be there. I reckon the time's come when I've got to say Miss Ginny," he added ruefully. The colonel rose, laughing, and hit the captain on the back. "Drat you, Legay, why don't you kiss the girl? Can't you see she's waiting?" The honest captain stole one glance at Virginia and turned red copper color. "Shucks, Colonel, I can't be kissing her always. What'll her husband say?" For an instant Mr. Carvel's brow clouded. "We'll not talk of husbands yet a while, Legay." Virginia went up to Captain Legay, deftly twisted into shape his black tie, and kissed him on the cheek. How his face burned when she touched him. "There," said she, "and don't you ever dare to treat me as a young lady. Why, Pa, he's blushing like a girl. I know. He's ashamed to kiss me now. He's going to be married at last to that Creole girl in New Orleans." "There's only one I'd ever marry, Ginny," protested the captain soberly, "and I'm a heap too old for her. But I've seen a youngster that might mate with her, Colonel," he added mischievously. "If he just wasn't a Yankee. Ginny, what's the story I hear about Judge Whipple's young man buying Hester?" Mr. Carvel looked uneasy. It was Virginia's turn to blush, and she grew red as a peony. "He's a tall, hateful, black Republican Yankee," she said. "Phew," whistled the captain. "Any more epithets?" "He's a nasty abolitionist." "There you do him wrong, honey," the colonel put in. "I hear he took Hester to Miss Crane's," the captain continued, filling the room with his hearty laughter. That boy has sand enough, Ginny. I'd like to know him. You'll have that priceless opportunity tonight, retorted Miss Virginia, as she flung herself out of the room. Pa has made me invite him to my party. Here, Ginny. Hold on, cried the captain, running after her. I've got something for you. She stopped on the stairs, hesitating. Whereupon the captain hastily ripped open the bundle under his arm and produced a very handsome India shawl. With a cry of delight, Virginia threw it over her shoulders and ran to the long glass between the high windows. Who spoils her, Legay? Asked the colonel fondly. Her father, I reckon, was the prompt reply. Who spoils you, Ginny? Captain Legay, said she, turning to him. If you had only kept the presents you have brought me from New Orleans, you might sell out your steamboat and be a rich man. He is a rich man, said the colonel promptly. Did you ever miss bringing her a present, Legay? He asked. When the Cora Anderson burnt, answered the captain. Why, cried Virginia. You brought me a piece of her wheel with the char on it. You swam ashore with it. So I did, said Captain Brent. I had forgotten that. It was when the French dress with the furbelows, which Madame Petou had gotten me from Paris for you, was lost. And I think I liked the piece of wool better, says Virginia. It was brought me by a brave man, the last to leave his boat. And who should be the last to leave, but the captain? I saw the thing in the water, and I just thought we ought to have a relic. Legay, said the colonel, putting up his feet. Do you remember the French toys you used to bring up here from New Orleans? Colonel, replied Brent. Do you recall the rough and uncouth young citizen who came over here from Cincinnati as clerk on the Vicksburg? I remember, sir, that he was so promising that they made him provisional captain the next trip, and he was not yet 24 years of age. And do you remember buying the Vicksburg at the sheriff's sale for $20,000 and handing her over to young Brent and saying, There, my son, she's your boat, and you can pay for her when you like? Shucks, Brent, said Mr. Carvel sternly. Your memory's too good, but I proved myself a good businessman, Ginny. He paid for her in a year. You don't mean that you made him pay you for the boat? Cried Ginny. Why, Pa, I didn't think you were that mean. The two men laughed heartily. I was a heap meaner, said her father. I made him pay interest. Virginia drew in her breath and looked at the colonel in amazement. He's the meanest man I know, said Captain Legay. He made me pay interest and a mint julep. Upon my word, Pa, said Miss Virginia soberly. I shouldn't have believed it of you. Just then Jackson, in his white jacket, came to announce that supper was ready, and they met Ned at the dining-room door, fairly staggering under a load of roses. Moss Clarence done send 'em in, to picked out in de hothouse dis afternoon, Miss Ginny. Jackson, fotch a bowl. No, said Virginia. She took the flowers from Ned, one by one, and to the wonderment of Captain Legay and her father strewed them hither and thither upon the table until the white cloth was hid by the red flowers. The colonel stroked his goatee and nudged Captain Legay. Look-a there now, said he. Any other woman would have spent 2 mortal hours stickin' 'em in China. Virginia, having critically surveyed her work, amid exclamations from Ned and Jackson, had gone around to her place. And there upon her plate lay a pearl necklace. For an instant she clapped her palms together, staring at it in bewilderment. And once more the little childish cry of delight, long sweet to the colonel's ears, escaped her. Pa, she said. Is it? And there she stopped, for fear that it might not be. But he nodded encouragingly. Dorothy Carvel's necklace. No, it can't be. Yes, honey, said the colonel. Your Uncle Daniel sent it, as he promised. And when you go upstairs, if Easter has done as I told her, you will see a primrose dress with blue coinflowers on your bed. Daniel thought you might like that, too, for a keepsake. Dorothy Manners wore it in London, when she was a girl. And so Virginia ran and threw her arms about her father's neck, and kissed him again and again. And lest the captain feel badly, she laid his India shawl beside her, and the necklace upon it. What a joyful supper they had, just the 3 of them, and as the fresh roses filled the room with fragrance, Virginia filled it with youth and spirits, and Mr. Carvel and the captain with honest, manly merriment. And Jackson plied Captain Brent, who was a prime favorite in that house, with broiled chicken and hot beet biscuits and with waffles, until at length he lay back in his chair and heaved a sigh of content, lighting a cigar. And then Virginia, with a little curtsy to both of them, ran off to dress for the party. "Well," said Captain Brent, "I reckon there'll be gay goings on here tonight. I wouldn't miss the sight of Colonel, for all the cargoes on the Mississippi. Ain't there anything I can do?" "No, thank you, Legay," Mr. Carvel answered. "Do you remember? One morning some 5 years ago, when I took in at the store a Yankee named Hopper. You didn't like him, I believe." Captain Brent jumped, and the ashes of his cigar fell on his coat. He had forgotten his conversation with Captain Grant. "I reckon I do," he said dryly. For a moment he was on the point of telling the affair. Then he desisted. He could not be sure of Eliphalet from Grant's description, so he decided to await a better time. Captain Brent was one to make sure of his channel before going ahead. "Well," continued the colonel, "I have been rather pushed the last week, and Hopper managed things for this dance. He got the music and saw the confectioner. But he made such a close bargain with both of 'em that they came around to me afterward," he added, laughing. "Is he coming here tonight?" demanded the captain, looking disgusted. "Legay," replied the colonel, "you never do get over a prejudice. Yes, he's coming just to oversee things. He seems to have mighty little pleasure, and he's got the best business head I ever did see." "A Yankee," said Mr. Carvel meditatively, as he put on his hat. "A Yankee, when he will work, works like all possessed. Hood don't like him any more than you do, but he allows Hopper is a natural-born businessman. Last month Samuels got tight, and Wright and Company were going to place the largest order in years. I called in Hood. 'Go yourself, Colonel,' says he. 'I am too old to solicit business, Hood,' said I. 'Then there's only one man to send,' says he, 'young Hopper. He'll get the order, or I'll give up this place I've had for 20 years. Hopper callated to get it, and another small one pitched in. And you'd die laughing, Legay, to hear how he did it. Some slickness, I'll gamble," grunted Captain Legay. "Well, I reckon 'twas slick," said the colonel thoughtfully. "You know old man Wright hates a solicitor like poison. He has his notions. And maybe you've noticed signs stuck up all over his store. 'No solicitors nor traveling men allowed here.'" The captain nodded. "But Hopper walks in, sir, bold as you please, right past the signs till he comes to the old man's cage. 'I want to see Mr. Wright,' says he to the clerk, and the clerk begins to grin. 'Name, please,' says he. Mr. Hopper whips out his business card. 'What?' shouts old Wright, flying round in his chair. 'What the devil does this mean? Can't you read, sir?' 'Calculate too,' says Mr. Hopper. 'And you dare to come in here? Business is business,' says Hopper. 'You calculate,' bellowed the old man. 'I reckon you're a damned Yankee. I reckon I'll upset your calations for once. And if I catch you in here again, I'll wring your neck like a rooster's. Git!' 'Who told you this?' asked Captain Brent. 'Wright himself, afterward,' replied Mr. Carvel, laughing. 'But listen, Legay, the old man lives at the planter's house, you know. What does Mr. Hopper do but go round there that very night and give a nigger 2 bits to put him at the old man's table. When Wright comes and sees him, he nearly has one of his apoplectic fits. But in marches Hopper the next morning with twice the order. The good Lord knows how he did it.' There was a silence. Then the doorbell rang. 'He's dangerous,' said the captain emphatically. 'That's what I call him. The Yankees are changing business in this town,' was the colonel's answer. 'We've got to keep the pace, Legay.' Chapter 13. The Party. To gentle Miss and Brincemaid, to Puss Russell of the mischievous eyes, and even to timid Eugenie Renault, the question that burned was, would he come or would he not? And, secondarily, how would Virginia treat him if he came? Put our friend Stephen for the subjective and Miss Carver's party for the objective in the above, and we have the clue. For very young girls are given to making much out of a very little in such matters. If Virginia had not gotten angry when she had been teased a fortnight before, all would have been well. Even Puss, who walked where angels feared to tread, did not dare to go too far with Virginia. She had taken care before the day of the party to beg forgiveness with considerable humility. It had been granted with a queenly generosity. And after that none of the bevy had dared to broach the subject to Virginia. Jack Brincemaid had. He told Puss afterward that when Virginia got through with him, he felt as if he had taken a rapid trip through the wheelhouse of a large steamer. Puss tried, by various ingenious devices, to learn whether Mr. Brice had accepted his invitation. She failed. These things added a zest to a party long looked forward to amongst Virginia's intimates. In those days young ladies did not come out so frankly as they do now. Mothers did not announce to the world that they possessed marriageable daughters. The world was supposed to know that, and then the matrimonial market was feverishly active. Young men proposed as naturally as they now ask a young girl to go for a walk, and were refused quite as naturally. An offer of marriage was not the fearful and wonderful thing, to be dealt with gingerly, which it has since become. 17 was often the age at which they began. And one of the big Catherwood boys had a habit of laying his heart and hand at Virginia's feet once a month. Nor did his vanity suffer greatly when she laughed at him. It was with a flutter of excitement, therefore, that Miss Carvel's guests flitted past Jackson, who held the door open obsequiously. The boldest of them took a rapid survey of the big parlor, before they put foot on the stairs to see whether Mr. Brice had yet arrived. And if their curiosity held them too long, they were usually kissed by the Colonel. Mr. Carvel shook hands heartily with the young men and called them by their first names, for he knew most of their fathers and grandfathers. And if an older gentleman arrived, perhaps the two might be seen going down the hall together, arm in arm. So came his beloved enemy, Judge Whipple, who did not make an excursion to the rear regions of the house with the Colonel. But they stood and discussed Mr. President Buchanan's responsibility for the recent panic, until the band, which Mr. Hopper had stationed under the stairs, drowned their voices. As we enter the room, there stands Virginia under the rainbowed prisms of the great chandelier, receiving. But here was suddenly a woman of 28, where only this evening we knew a slip of a girl. It was a trick she had to become majestic in a ball gown. She held her head high, as a woman should, and at her slender throat glowed the pearls of Dorothy Manners. The result of all this was to strike a little awe into the souls of many of her playmates. Little Eugenie nearly dropped a curtsy. Belle Clume was so impressed that she forgot for a whole hour to be spiteful. But Puss Russell kissed her on both cheeks, and asked her if she really wasn't nervous. "Nervous!" exclaimed Ginny. "Why?" Miss Russell glanced significantly towards the doorway, but she said nothing to her hostess, for fear of marring an otherwise happy occasion. She retired with Jack Brincemaid to a corner, where she recited, "Oh, young Lochinvar is come out of the East. Of millions of Yankees I love him the least." "What a joke if he should come!" cried Jack. Miss Russell gasped. Just as Mr. Clarence Colfax, resplendent in new evening clothes just arrived from New York, was pressing his claim for the first dance with his cousin in opposition to numerous other claims, the chatter of the guests died away. Virginia turned her head, and for an instant the pearls trembled on her neck. There was a young man cordially and unconcernedly shaking hands with her father and Captain Legay. Her memory of that moment is, strangely, not of his face. She did not deign to look at that, but of the muscle of his shoulder half revealed as he stretched forth his arm. Young Mr. Colfax bent over to her ear. "Virginia," he whispered earnestly, almost fiercely. "Virginia, who invited him here?" "I did," said Virginia calmly. "Of course, who invites anyone here?" "But," cried Clarence, "do you know who he is?" "Yes," she answered, "I know. And is that any reason why he should not come here as a guest? Would you bar any gentleman from your house on account of his convictions?" "Ah, Virginia, who had thought to hear that argument from your lips? What would frank Captain Legay say of the consistency of women, if he heard you now? And how give an account of yourself to and Brincemaid? What contrariness has set you so intense against your own argument?" Before one can answer this, before Mr. Clarence can recover from his astonishment and remind her of her vehement words on the subject at Bellegarde, Mr. Stephen is making thither with the air of one who conquers. Again, the natural contrariness of women. What bare-faced impudence! Has he no shame that he should hold his head so high? She feels her color mounting, even as her resentment rises at his self-possession. And yet she would have despised him had he shown self-consciousness in gait or manner in the sight of her assembled guests. Nearly as tall as the colonel himself, he is plainly seen, and Miss Puss in her corner does not have to stand on tiptoe. Mr. Carvel does the honors of the introduction. But a daughter of the Carvels was not to fail before such a paltry situation as this. Shall it be confessed that curiosity stepped into the breach? As she gave him her hand, she was wondering how he would act. As a matter of fact, he acted detestably. He said nothing whatever, but stood regarding her with a clear eye and a face by far too severe. The thought that he was meditating on the incident of the auction sale crossed through her mind, and made her blood simmer. How dared he behave so? The occasion called for a little small talk. An evil spirit took possession of Virginia. She turned. "Mr. Brice, do you know my cousin, Mr. Colfax?" she said. Mr. Brice bowed. "I know Mr. Colfax by sight," he replied. Then Mr. Colfax made a stiff bow. To this new phase his sense of humor did not rise. Mr. Brice was a Yankee and no gentleman, inasmuch as he had overbid a lady for Hester. "Have you come here to live, Mr. Brice?" he asked. The colonel eyed his nephew sharply, but Stephen smiled. "Yes," he said, "if I can presently make enough to keep me alive." Then turning to Virginia, he said, "Will you dance, Miss Carvel?" The effrontery of this demand quite drew the breath from the impatient young gentlemen who had been waiting their turn. Several of them spoke up in remonstrance, and for the moment, let one confess it who knows, Virginia was almost tempted to lay her arm in his. Then she made a bow that would have been quite as effective the length of the room. "Thank you, Mr. Brice," she said, "but I am engaged to Mr. Colfax." Abstractedly, he watched her glide away in her cousin's arms. Stephen had a way of being preoccupied at such times. When he grew older, he would walk the length of Olive Street, look into face after face of acquaintances, not a quiver of recognition in his eyes. But most probably the next week he would win a brilliant case in the Supreme Court. And so now, indifferent to the amusement of some about him, he stood staring after Virginia and Clarence. Where had he seen Colfax's face before he came west? He knew. Many, many years before he had stood with his father in the mellow light of the Long Gallery at Hollingdean, Kent, before a portrait of the Stuarts' time. The face was that of one of Lord Northwell's ancestors, a sporting nobleman of the time of the Second Charles. It was a head which compelled one to pause before it. Strangely enough, it was the head likewise of Clarence Colfax. The image of it Stephen had carried undimmed in the eye of his memory. White-haired Northwell's story also. It was not a story that Mr. Brice had expected his small son to grasp. As a matter of fact, Stephen had not grasped it then, but years afterward. It was not a pleasant story, and yet there was much of credit in it to the young rake its subject, of dash and courage and princely generosity beside the profligacy and incontinence. The face had impressed him with its story. He had often dreamed of it, and of the lace collar over the dull gold velvet that became it so well. And here it was at last, in a city west of the Mississippi River. Here were the same delicately chiseled features, with their pallor and satiety engraved there at 21. Here was the same lazy scorn in the eyes, and the look which sleeplessness gives to the lids. The hair, straight and fine and black, the willful indulgence, not of one life but of generations, about the mouth, the pointed chin. And yet it was a fact to dare anything and to do anything. One thing more ere we have done with that which no man may explain. Had he dreamed, too, of the girl? Of Virginia? Stephen might not tell, but thrice had the colonel spoken to him before he answered. "You must meet some of these young ladies, sir." It was little wonder that Puss Russell thought him dull on that first occasion. Out of whom condescension is to flow is a matter of which heaven takes no cognizance. To use her own words, Puss thought him stuck up, when he should have been grateful. We know that Stephen was not stuck up, and later Miss Russell learned that likewise. Very naturally she took preoccupation for indifference. It is a matter worth recording, however, that she did not tease him, because she did not dare. He did not ask her to dance, which was rude. So she passed him back to Mr. Carvel, who introduced him to Miss Renaud and Miss St. Cyr, and other young ladies of the best French families. And finally, drifting hither and thither with his eyes on Virginia, in an evil moment he was presented to Mrs. Colfax. Perhaps it has been guessed that Mrs. Colfax was a very great lady indeed, albeit the daughter of an overseer. She bore Addison Colfax's name, spent his fortune, and retained her good looks. On this particular occasion she was enjoying herself quite as much as any young girl in the room, and, while resting from a waltz, was regaling a number of gentlemen with a humorous account of a scandal at the Virginia Springs. None but a great lady could have meted out the punishment administered to poor Stephen. None but a great lady could have concerned it. And he, who had never been snubbed before, fell headlong into her trap. How was the boy to know that there was no heart in the smile with which she greeted him? It was all over in an instant. She continued to talk about Virginia Springs. "Oh, Mr. Brice, of course you have been there. Of course you know the Edmonds." "No? You haven't been there? You don't know the Edmonds? I thought everybody had been there. Charles, you look as if you were just dying to waltz. Let's have a turn before the music stops." And so she whirled away, leaving Stephen forlorn, a little too angry to be amused just then. In that state he spied a gentleman coming towards him, a gentleman the sight of whom he soon came to associate with all that is good and kindly in this world, Mr. Brincemaid. And now he put his hand on Stephen's shoulder. Whether he had seen the incident just past, who can tell? "My son," said he, "I am delighted to see you here. Now that we are such near neighbors, we must be nearer friends. You must know my wife, and my son Jack, and my daughter Anne." Mrs. Brincemaid was a pleasant little body, but plainly not a fit mate for her husband. Jack gave Stephen a warm grasp of the hand, and an amused look. As for Anne, she was more like her father. She was Stephen's friend from that hour. "I have seen you quite often, going in at your gate, Mr. Brice, and I have seen your mother, too." "I like her," said Anne. "She has such a wonderful face." And the girl raised her truthful blue eyes to his. "My mother would be delighted to know you," he ventured, not knowing what else to say. It was an effort for him to reflect upon their new situation as poor tenants to a wealthy family. "Oh, do you think so?" cried Anne. "I shall call on her tomorrow with mother. Do you know, Mr. Brice," she continued, "do you know that your mother is just the person I should go to if I were in trouble, whether I knew her or not?" "I have found her a good person in trouble," said Stephen simply. He might have said the same of Anne, and was enchanted. She had thought him cold, but these words belied that. She had wrapped him in that diaphanous substance with which young ladies, and sometimes older ones, are wont to deck their heroes. She had approached a mystery to find it human as are many mysteries. But thank heaven that she found a dignity, a seriousness, and these more than satisfied her. Likewise, she discovered something she had not looked for, an occasional way of saying things that made her laugh. She danced with him and passed him back to Miss Puss Russell, who was better pleased this time. She passed him on to her sister, who also danced with him, and sent him upstairs for her handkerchief. Nevertheless, Stephen was troubled. As the evening wore on, he was more and more aware of an uncompromising attitude in his young hostess, whom he had seen whispering to various young ladies from behind her fan as they passed her. He had not felt equal to asking her to dance a second time. Honest Captain Legay-Brest, who seemed to have taken a fancy to him, bandied him on his lack of courage with humor that was a little rough. And, to Stephen's amazement, even Judge Whipple had pricked him on. It was on his way upstairs after Emily Russell's handkerchief that he ran across another acquaintance. Mr. Eliphalet Hopper, in Sunday broadcloth, was seated on the landing, his head lowered to the level of the top of the high door of the parlor. Stephen caught a glimpse of the picture whereon his eyes were fixed. Perhaps it is needless to add that Miss Virginia Carvel formed the central figure of it. "Enjoy in yourself?" asked Mr. Hopper. Stephen countered. "Are you?" he asked. So, said Mr. Hopper, and added darkly, "I ain't in no hurry. Just now they cal'late I'm about good enough to manage the business end of an affair like this here. I guess I can wait. But someday, said he, suddenly barring Stephen's way, someday I'll give a party. And hark to me when I tell you that these here aristocrats'll be glad enough to get invitations. Stephen pushed past coldly. This time the man made him shiver. The incident was all that was needed to dishearten and disgust him. Kindly as he had been treated by others, far back in his soul was a thing that rankled. Shall it be told crudely why he went that night? Stephen Brice, who would not lie to others, lied to himself. And when he came downstairs again and presented Miss Emily with her handkerchief, his next move was in his mind. And that was to say good night to the Colonel, and more frigidly to Miss Carvel herself. But music has upset many a man's calculations. The strains of the Jenny Lind waltz were beginning to float through the rooms. There was Miss Virginia in a corner of the big parlor, for the moment alone with her cousin, and thither Stephen sternly strode. Not a sign did she give of being aware of his presence until he stood before her. Even then she did not lift her eyes, but she said, "So you have come at last to try again, Mr. Brice?" And Mr. Brice said, "If you will do me the honor, Miss Carvel." She did not reply at once. Clarence Colfax got to his feet. Then she looked up at the two men as they stood side by side, and perhaps swept them both in an instant's comparison. The New Englander's face must have reminded her more of her own father, Colonel Carvel. It possessed, from generations known, the power to control itself. She afterwards admitted that she accepted him to tease Clarence. Miss Russell, whose intuitions are usually correct, does not believe this. "I will dance with you," said Virginia. But, once in his arms, she seemed like a wild thing, resisting. Although her gown brushed his coat, the space between them was infinite, and her hand lay limp in his, unresponsive of his own pressure. Not so her feet. They caught the step and moved with the rhythm of the music, and round the room they swung. More than one pair paused in the dance to watch them. Then, as they glided past the door, Stephen was disagreeably conscious of someone gazing down from above, and he recalled Eliphalet Hopper and his position. The sneer from Eliphalet's seemed to penetrate like a chilly draught. All at once, Virginia felt her partner gathering up his strength, and by some compelling force, more of wild than of muscle, draw her nearer. Unwillingly her hand tightened under his, and her blood beat faster and her color came and went as they two moved as one. Anger, helpless anger, took possession of her as she saw the smiles on the faces of her friends, and Puss Russell mockingly throwing a kiss as she passed her. And then, strange in the telling, a thrill as of power rose within her which she strove against in vain. A knowledge of him who guided her so swiftly, so unerringly, which she had felt with no other man. Faster and faster they stepped, each forgetful of self and place, until the waltz came suddenly to a stop. "By gum," said Captain Legay to Judge Whipple, "you can hollop me on my own forecastle if they ain't the handsomest couple I ever did see." Chapter 14. Raw material. Summer, intolerable summer, was upon the city at last. The families of its richest citizens had fled. Even at that early day some braved the long railroad journey to the Atlantic coast. Amongst these were our friends the Clumes, who come not strongly into this history. Some went to the Virginia Springs, but many, like the Brincemaids and the Russells, the Tiptons and the Hollingsworths, retired to the local paradise of their country places on the Bellefontaine Road, on the cool heights above the river. Thither, as a respite from the hot office, Stephen was often invited by kind Mr. Brincemaid, who sometimes drove him out in his own buggy. Likewise he had visited Miss Puss Russell. But Miss Virginia Carvel he had never seen since the night he had danced with her. This was because, after her return from the young ladies' school at Monticello, she had gone to Glencoe, magic spot, perched high on wooded highlands, and under these the Merrimack, crystal pure, ran lightly on sand and pebble to her bridle with that turbid tyrant, the father of waters. To reach Glencoe you spent 2 dirty hours on that railroad which, it was fondly hoped, would one day stretch to the Pacific Ocean. You generally spied one of the big Catherwood boys in the train, or their tall sister Maud. The Catherwoods likewise lived at Glencoe in the summer. And on some Saturday afternoons a grim figure in a linen duster and a silk skullcap took a seat in the forward car. That was Judge Whipple on his way to spend a quiet Sunday with Colonel Carvel. To the surprise of many good people, the judge had recently formed another habit. At least once a week he would drop in at the little house on Olive Street next to Mr. Brincemaid's big one, which was shut up, and take tea with Mrs. Brice. Afterward he would sit on the little porch over the garden in the rear, or on the front steps, and watch the bobtailed horse-cars go by. His conversation was chiefly addressed to the widow, rarely to Stephen, whose wholesome respect for his employer had in no wise abated. Through the stifling heat of these summer days Stephen sat in the outer office, straining at the law. Had it not been for the fact that Mr. Whipple went to his mother's house, despair would have seized him long since. Apparently his goings out and his comings in were noted only by Mr. Richter. Truly the judge's methods were not Harvard methods. And if there were pride in the young Bostonian, Mr. Whipple thought he knew the cure for it. It was to Richter Stephen owed a debt of gratitude in these days. He would often take his midday meal in the downtown beer garden with the quiet German. Then there came a Sunday afternoon, to be marked with a red letter, when Richter transported him into Germany itself. Stephen's eyes were opened. Richter took him across the Rhine. The Rhine was Market Street, and south of that street was a country of which polite American society took no cognizance. Here was an epic movement indeed, for South St. Louis was a great sod uprooted from the fatherland and set down in all its vigorous crudity in the warm black mud of the Mississippi Valley. Here lager beer took the place of bourbon, and black bread and sausages of hot rolls and fried chicken. Here were quaint market houses squatting in the middle of wide streets, Lutheran churches, square and uncompromising, and bulky Turner halls, where German children were taught the German tongue. Here, in a shady grove of mulberry and locust, 200 families were spread out at their ease. For a while Richter sat in silence, puffing at a meerschaum with a huge brown bowl. A trick of the mind opened for Stephen one of the histories in his father's library in Beacon Street, across the pages of which had flitted the ancestors of this blue-eyed and great-chested Saxon. He saw them in cathedral forests, with the red hair long upon their bodies. He saw terrifying battles with the Roman Empire surging back and forth through the Low Countries. He saw a lad of 20 at the head of rugged legions clad in wild skins, sweeping Rome out of Gaul. Back in the dim ages Richter's fathers must have defended grim Eresburg. And it seemed to him that in the end the new republic must profit by this rugged stock, which had good women for wives and mothers, and for fathers men in whose blood dwelt a fierce patriotism and contempt for cowardice. This fancy of ancestry pleased Stephen. He thought of the forefathers of those whom he knew, who dwelt north of Market Street. Many, though this generation of the French might know it not, had bled at Calais and at Agincourt, had followed the court of France in clumsy coaches to Blois and Amboise, or lived in hovels under the castle walls. Others had charged after the Black Prince at Poitiers, and fought as serf or noble. In the War of the Roses, had been hatters or tailors in Cromwell's armies, or else had sacrificed lands and fortunes for Charles Stuart. These English had toiled, slow but resistless, over the misty Blue Ridge after Boone and Herod to this old St. Louis of the French, their enemies, whose fur traders and missionaries had long followed the veins of the vast western wilderness. And now, on to the structure builded by these two, comes Germany to be welded, to strengthen or to weaken. Richter put down his pipe on the table. "Stephen," he said suddenly, "you do not share the prejudice against us here?" Stephen flushed. He thought of some vigorous words that Miss Puss Russell had used on the subject of the Dutch. "No," said he emphatically. "I am glad," answered Richter with a note of sadness in his voice. "Do not despise us before you know more of us. We are still feudal in Germany of the Middle Ages. The peasant is a serf. He is compelled to serve the lord of the land every year with so much labor of his hands. The small farmers, the gross and middle-born, we call them, are also mortgaged to the nobles who tyrannize our Vaterland. Our merchants are little merchants, shopkeepers, you would say. My poor father, an educated man, was such. They fought our revolution. And now," said Stephen, "why do they not keep their hold?" Richter sighed. "We were unused to ruling, he answered. We knew not how to act, what to do. You must remember that we were not trained to govern ourselves, as are you of the English race, from children. Those who have been for centuries ground under heel do not make practical parliamentarians. No, your heritage is liberty, you Americans and English, and we Germans must desert our native land to partake of it. And was it not hard to leave? Asked Stephen gently. The eyes of the German filled at the recollection, nor did he seem ashamed of his tears. I had a poor old father whose life was broken to save the Vaterland, but not his spirit, he cried. No, not that. My father was born in 1797. God directed my grandfather to send him to the Kölnisches Gymnasium, where the great John taught. John was our Washington, the father of Germany that is to be. Then our fatherland was French. Our women wore Parisian clothes and spoke the language. French immorality and atheism had spread like a plague among us. Napoleon the Vile had taken the sword of our Frederick from Berlin. It was Father John, so we love to call him. It was Father John who founded the Turnschulin, that the generations to come might return to simple German ways. Plain fare, high principles, our native tongue, and the development of the body. The downfall of the fiend Napoleon and the Vaterland united. These two his scholars must have written in their hearts. All summer long, in their black caps and linen pantaloons, they would trudge after him, begging a crust here and a cheese there, to spread his teachings far and wide under the thatched roofs. Then came 1811. I have heard my father tell how in the heat of that year a great red comet burned in the sky, even as that we now see, my friend. God forbid that this portends blood. But in the coming spring the French conscripts filled our sacred land like a swarm of locusts, devouring as they went. And at their head, with the pomp of Darius, rode that destroyer of nations and homes, Napoleon. What was Germany then? Ashes. But the red embers were beneath, fanned by Father John. Napoleon at Dresden made our princes weep. Never, even in the days of the Frankish kings, had we been so humbled. He dragged our young men with him to Russia, and left them to die moaning on the frozen wastes, while he drove off in his sledge. It was the next year that Germany rose. High and low, rich and poor, Jäger and Landwehr, came flocking into the army, and even the old men, the Landsturm. Russia was an ally and later Austria. My father, a last of 16, was in the Landwehr, under the noble Blücher in Silesia, when they drove the French into the Katzbach and the Neisse, swollen by the rains into torrents. It had rained until the forests were marshes. Powder would not burn. But Blücher, there was a man. He whipped his great saber from under his cloak, crying Vorwärts, Vorwärts, and the Landwehr with one great shout slew their enemies with the butts of their muskets until their arms were weary and the bodies were tossed like logs in the foaming waters. They called Blücher Marechal Vorwärts. Then Napoleon was sent to Elba. But the victors quarreled amongst themselves, while Talleyrand and Metternich tore our Vaterland into strips, and set brother against brother. And our blood, and the grief for the widows and the fatherless, went for nothing. Richter paused to light his pipe. After a while, he continued presently, came the German Confederation with Austria at the head. Rid of Napoleon, we had another despot in Metternich. But the tree which John had planted grew, and its branches spread. The great master was surrounded by spies. My father had gone to Jena University when he joined the Burschenschaft or Students' League, of which I will tell you later. It was pledged to the rescue of the Vaterland. He was sent to prison for dipping his handkerchief in the blood of sand, beheaded for liberty at Mannheim. Afterwards he was liberated, and went to Berlin and married my mother, who died when I was young. Twice again he was in prison because the societies met at his house. We were very poor, my friend. You in America know not the meaning of that word. His health broke, and when 48 came, he was an old man. His hair was white, and he walked the streets with a crutch. But he had saved a little money to send me to Jena. He was proud of me. I was big-boned and fair, like my mother. And when I came home at the end of a semester, I can see him now, as he would hobble to the door, wearing the red and black and gold of the Burschenschaft. And he would keep me up half the night telling him of our Schläger fights with the aristocrats. My father had been a noted swordsman in his day. He stopped abruptly and colored, for Stephen was staring at the jagged scar. He had never summoned the courage to ask Richter how he came by it. "Schläger fights?" he exclaimed. "Broadswords," answered the German hastily. "Some day I will tell you of them, and of the struggle with the troops in the Breitstrasse in March. We lost, as I told you, because we knew not how to hold what we had gained. I left Germany, hoping to make a home here for my poor father. How sad his face as he kissed me farewell. And he said to me, 'Carl, if ever your new Vaterland, the good republic, be in danger, sacrifice all. I have spent my years in bondage, and I say to you that life without liberty is not worth the living.' 3 months I was gone, and he was dead, without that for which he had striven so bravely. He never knew what it is to have an abundance of meat. He never knew from one day to the other when he would have to embrace me, all he owned, and march away to prison, because he was a patriot." Richter's voice had fallen low, but now he raised it. "Do you think, my friend," he cried, "do you think that I would not die willingly for this new country if the time should come? Yes, and there are a million like me, once German, now American, who will give their lives to preserve this union. For without it the world is not fit to live in." Stephen had food for thought as he walked northward through the strange streets on that summer evening. Here indeed was a force not to be reckoned, and which few had taken into account. Chapter 15. Abraham Lincoln. It is sometimes instructive to look back and see our destiny gave us a kick here, and fate a shove there, that sent us in the right direction at the proper time. And when Stephen Brice looks backward now, he laughs to think that he did not suspect the judge of being an ally of the two who are mentioned above. The sum total of Mr. Whipple's words and advices to him that summer had been these. Stephen was dressed more carefully than usual, in view of a visit to Bellefontaine Road. Whereupon the judge demanded whether he were contemplating marriage. Without waiting for a reply, he pointed to a rope and a slab of limestone on the pavement below, and waved his hand unmistakably toward the Mississippi. Miss Russell was of the opinion that Mr. Whipple had once been crossed in love. But we are to speak more particularly of a put-up job, although Stephen did not know this at the time. Towards 5 o'clock of a certain afternoon in August of that year, 1858, Mr. Whipple emerged from his den. Instead of turning to the right, he strode straight to Stephen's table. His communications were always a trifle startling. This was no exception. "Mr. Brice," said he, "you are to take the 6:45 train on the St. Louis, Alton, and Chicago Road tomorrow morning for Springfield, Illinois." "Yes, sir." "Arriving at Springfield, you are to deliver this envelope into the hands of Mr. Abraham Lincoln, of the law firm of Lincoln and Herndon." "Abraham Lincoln!" cried Stephen, rising and straddling his chair. "But, sir—" "Abraham Lincoln," interrupted the judge forcibly. "I try to speak plainly, sir. You are to deliver it into Mr. Lincoln's hands. If he is not in Springfield, find out where he is and follow him up. Your expenses will be paid by me. The papers are important. Do you understand, sir?" Stephen did, and he knew better than to argue the matter with Mr. Whipple. He had read in the Missouri Democrat of this man Lincoln, a country lawyer who had once been to Congress, and who was even now disputing the senatorship of his state with the renowned Douglas. In spite of their complacent amusement, he had won a little admiration from conservative citizens who did not believe in the efficacy of Judge Douglas's squatter sovereignty. Likewise this Mr. Lincoln, who had once been a rail-sputter, was uproariously derided by Northern Democrats because he had challenged Mr. Douglas to 7 debates, to be held at different towns in the state of Illinois. David, with his sling and his smooth round pebble, must have had much of the same sympathy and ridicule. For Mr. Douglas, senator and judge, was a national character, mighty in politics, invulnerable in the armor of his oratory, and he was known far and wide as the Little Giant. Those whom he did not conquer with his logic were impressed by his person. Stephen remembered with a thrill that these debates were going on now. One, indeed, had been held, and had appeared in fine print in a corner of the Democrat. Perhaps this Lincoln might not be in Springfield. Perhaps he, Stephen Brice, might, by chance, hit upon a debate, and see and hear the tower of the democracy, the Honorable Stephen A. Douglas. But it is greatly to be feared that our friend Stephen was bored with his errand before he arrived at the little wooden station of the Illinois capital. Standing on the platform after the train pulled out, he summoned up courage to ask a citizen with no mustache and a beard, which he swept away when he spat, where was the office of Lincoln and Herndon. The stranger spat twice, regarded Mr. Brice pityingly, and finally led him in silence past the picket fence and the New England-looking meeting-house opposite until they came to the great square on which the State House squatted. The State House was a building with much pretension to beauty, built in the classical style of a yellow stone, with soled white blinds in the high windows and mighty columns capped at the gently slanting roof. But on top of it was reared a crude wooden dome, like a clay head on a marble statue. "That there," said the stranger, "is whar we watches for the county delegations when they come in to a meetin'." And with this remark, pointing with a stubby thumb up a well-worn stair, he departed before Stephen could thank him. Stephen paused under the awning, of which there were many shading the brick pavement, to regard the straggling line of stores and houses which surrounded and did homage to the yellow pile. The brick house in which Mr. Lincoln's office was had decorations above the windows. Mounting the stair, Stephen found a room bare enough, save for a few chairs and law books, and not a soul in attendance. After sitting a while by the window, mopping his brow with a handkerchief, he went out on the landing to make inquiries. There he met another citizen in shirt sleeves, like unto the first, in the very act of sweeping his beard out of the way of a dexterous expectoration. "Wall, young man," said he, "who be you lookin' for here?" "For Mr. Lincoln," said Stephen. At this the gentleman sat down on the dirty top step, and gave vent to quiet but annoying laughter. "I reckon you come to the wrong place. I was told this was his office," said Stephen with some heat. "Whar be you from?" said the citizen with interest. "I don't see what that has to do with it," answered our friend. "Wall," said the citizen critically, "if you was from Philadelphia or Boston you might stand acquitted." Stephen was on the point of claiming Boston, but wisely hesitated. "I'm from St. Louis with a message for Mr. Lincoln," he replied. "Ye talk like why ye was from down east," said the citizens who seemed in the humor for conversation. "I reckon old Abe's too busy to see you. Say, young man, did you ever hear of Stephen Arnold Douglas, alias the Little Giant, alias the idol of our state, sir?" This was too much for Stephen, who left the citizen without the compliment of a farewell. Continuing around the square, inquiring for Mr. Lincoln's house, he presently got beyond the stores and burning pavements onto a plank walk, under great shade trees, and past old brick mansions set well back from the street. At length he paused in front of a wooden house of a dirty grayish-brown, too high for its length and breadth, with tall shutters of the same color, and a picket fence on top of the retaining wall which lifted the yard above the plank walk. It was an ugly house, surely, but an ugly house may look beautiful when surrounded by such heavy trees as this was. Their shade was the most inviting thing Stephen had seen. A boy of 16 or so was swinging on the gate, plainly a very mischievous boy, with a round, laughing, sunburned face and bright eyes. In front of the gate was a shabby carriage with top and side curtains, hitched to a big bay horse. "Can you tell me where Mr. Lincoln lives?" inquired Stephen. "Well, I guess," said the boy. "I'm his son, and he lives right here when he's at home. But that hasn't been often lately." "Where is he?" asked Stephen, beginning to realize the purport of his conversations with citizens. Young Mr. Lincoln mentioned the name of a small town in the northern part of the state, where he said his father would stop that night. He told Stephen that he looked wilted, invited him into the house to have a glass of lemonade, and to join him and another boy in a fishing excursion with the big bay horse. Stephen told young Mr. Lincoln that he should have to take the first train after his father. "Jimmy!" exclaimed the other enviously. "Then you'll hear the Freeport debate." Now it has been said that the day was scorching hot, and when Stephen had got back to the wooden station, and had waited an hour for the Bloomington Express, his anxiety to hear the Freeport debate was not as keen as it might have been. Late in the afternoon he changed at Bloomington to the Illinois Central Railroad. The sun fell down behind the cardboard edge of the prairie, the train rattled on into the north, wrapped in its dust and smoke, and presently became a long comet roaring red, to match that other comet which flashed in the sky. By this time it may be said that our friend was heartily sick of his mission. He tried to doze. But two men, a farmer and a clerk, got in at a way station and sat behind him. They began to talk about this man Lincoln. "Shucks," said the clerk. "Think of him opposing the little giant." "He's right smart, Sam," said the farmer. "He's got a way of saying things that's clear. We boys can foller him. But Steve Douglas, he only mixes you up." His companion guffawed. "Because why?" he shouted. "Because you ain't had no education. What does a rail sputter like Abe know about this government? Judge Douglas has worked it all out. He's smart. Let the territories take care of themselves. Besides, Abe ain't got no dignity. The fust of this week I seen him sidetracked down the road here in a caboose, while Doug went by in a special." "Abe is a plain man, Sam," the farmer answered solemnly. "But you watch out for him." It was 10 o'clock when Stephen descended at his destination. Merciful night hid from his view the forlorn station and the ragged town. The baggage man told him that Mr. Lincoln was at the tavern. That tavern. Will words describe the impression it made on a certain young man from Boston? It was long and low and ramshackly and hot that night as the inside of a brick kiln. As he drew near it on the single-plant walk over the black prairie mud, he saw countrymen and politicians swarming its narrow porch and narrower hall. Discussions in all keys were in progress, and it was with vast difficulty that our distracted young man pushed through and found the landlord. This personage was the coolest of the lot. Confusion was but food for his smiles, importunity but increased his suavity. And of the seeming hundreds that pressed him, he knew and utilized the Christian name of all. From behind a corner of the bar he held them all at bay, and sent them to quarters like the old campaigner he was. "Now, Ben, 'tain't no use gettin' mad. You and Josh Way, and Will and Sam, and the captain, and the 4 Beaver brothers, will all sleep in number 10. What's that, Franklin? No, siree, the Honorable Abe and Mr. Hill, and Jedge Oglesby is sleepin' in 7. The smell of perspiration was stifling as Stephen pushed up to the master of the situation. "What's that? Supper, young man? Ain't you had no supper? Gosh, I reckon if you can fight your way to the dinin' room, the gals'll give you some pork and a cup of coffee." After a preliminary scuffle with a drunken countryman in mud-caked boots, Mr. Brice presently reached the long table in the dining room. A sense of humor not quite extinct made him smile as he devoured pork chops and greasy potatoes and heavy apple pie. As he was finishing the pie, he became aware of the tavern keeper standing over him. "Are you one of them Flip Shikiji reporters?" asked that worthy, with a suspicious eye on Stephen's clothes. Our friend denied this. "You didn't talk just like em. Guess you'll be here tonight?" "Yes," said Stephen wearily, and he added, outs of force of habit, "Can you give me a room?" "I reckon," was the cheerful reply. "Number 10. There ain't nobody in there but Ben Billings, and the 4 Beaver brothers and 3 more. I'll have a shakedown for ye next the north window." Stephen's thanks for the hospitality perhaps lacked heartiness. But perceiving his host still contemplating him, he was emboldened to say, "Has Mr. Lincoln gone to bed?" "Who? Old Abe at 10:30? Well, I reckon you don't know him." Stephen's reflections here on the dignity of the senatorial candidate of the Republican Party in Illinois were novel, at any rate. He thought of certain senators he had seen in Massachusetts. "The only reason he ain't down here swappin' yarns with the boys is because he's havin' some sort of confab with the Jedge and Joe Medill of the Shikiji Press and Tribune." "Do you think he would see me?" asked Stephen eagerly. He was emboldened by the apparent lack of ceremony of the candidate. The landlord looked at him in some surprise. "Wall, I reckon. Jest go up and knock at the door number 7, and say Tom Wright sent ye." "How shall I know Mr. Lincoln?" asked Stephen. "Pick out the ugliest man in the room. There ain't nobody I kin think of uglier than Abe." Bearing in mind this succinct description of the candidate, Stephen climbed the rickety stairs to the low 2nd story. All the bedroom doors were flung open except one, on which the number 7 was inscribed. From within came bursts of uproarious laughter, and a summons to enter. He pushed open the door, and as soon as his eyes became accustomed to the tobacco smoke, he surveyed the room. There was a bowl on the floor, the chair where it belonged being occupied. There was a very inhospitable-looking bed, 2 shakedowns, and 4 Windsor chairs in more or less state of dilapidation, all occupied likewise. A country glass lamp was balanced on a rough shelf, and under it a young man sat absorbed in making notes, and apparently oblivious to the noise around him. Every gentleman in the room was collarless, coatless, tieless, and vestless. Some were engaged in fighting gnats and June bugs, while others battled with mosquitoes, all save the young man who wrote, he being wholly indifferent. Stephen picked out the homeliest man in the room. There was no mistaking him, and, instead of a discussion of the campaign with the other gentlemen, Mr. Lincoln was defending what do you think? Mr. Lincoln was defending an occasional and judicious use of swear words. "Judge," said he, "you do an almighty lot of cussing in your speeches, and perhaps it ain't a bad way to keep things stirred up." "Well," said the judge, "a fellow will rip out something once in a while before he has time to shut it off." Mr. Lincoln passed his fingers through his tousled hair. His thick lower lip crept over in front of the upper one. A gleam stirred in the deep-set gray eyes. "Boys," he asked, "did I ever tell you about Samuel, the old Quaker's apprentice?" There was a chorus of noes and "Go ahead, Abe." The young man who was writing dropped his pencil. As for Stephen, this long, uncouth man of the plains was beginning to puzzle him. The face, with its crude features and deep furrows, relaxed into intense soberness, and Mr. Lincoln began his story with a slow earnestness that was truly startling, considering the subject. "This apprentice, Judge, was just such an incurable as you." Laughter. "And Samuel, when he wanted to, could get out as many cusses in a second as his anvil shot sparks. And the old man used to wrestle with him nights and speak about punishment, and pray for him in meeting. But it didn't do any good. When anything went wrong, Samuel had an appropriate word for the occasion. One day the old man got an inspiration when he was scratching around in the dirt for an odd-sized iron. "Samuel," says he, "I want thee." Samuel went and found the old man standing over a big rat hole, where the rats came out to feed on the scraps. "Samuel," says he, "fetch the tongs." Samuel fetched the tongs. "Now, Samuel," says the old man, "thou wilt sit here until thou hast a rat. Never mind thy dinner. And when thou hast him, if I hear thee swear, thou wilt sit here until thou hast another. Dost thou mind?" Here Mr. Lincoln seized 2 cotton umbrellas, rasped his chair over the bare board into a corner of the room, and sat hunched over an imaginary rat hole, for all the world like a gawky Quaker apprentice. And this was a candidate for the Senate of the United States, who on the morrow was to meet in debate the renowned and polished Douglas. "Well," Mr. Lincoln continued, "that was on a Monday, I reckon, and the boys shouting to have their horses shod. Maybe you think they didn't have some fun with Samuel. But Samuel sat there and sat there and sat there, and after a while the old man pulled out his dinner pail. Samuel never opened his mouth. First thing you know, snip went the tongs." Mr. Lincoln turned gravely around. "What do you reckon Samuel said, Judge?" The judge, at random, summoned up a good one, to the delight of the audience. "Judge," said Mr. Lincoln with solemnity, "I reckon that's what you'd have said." Samuel never said a word, and the old man kept on eating his dinner. 1 o'clock came, and the folks began to drop in again, but Samuel, he sat there. Long towards night the boys collected round the door. They were getting kind of interested. Samuel, he never looked up. Here Mr. Lincoln bent forward a little, and his voice fell to a loud, drawling whisper. First thing you know, here come the whiskers peeping up, then the pink eyes blinking at the forge, then, suddenly he brought the umbrellas together with whack. "By God," yells Samuel, "I have thee at last." Amid the shouts, Mr. Lincoln stood up, his long body swaying to and fro as he lifted high the improvised tongs. They heard a terrified squeal, and there was the rat squirming and wriggling. It seemed before their very eyes, and Stephen forgot the country tavern, the country politician, and was transported straightway into the Quaker smithy. Thank you for listening to Part 3 of The Crisis by Winston Churchill. The story continues in Part 4. Stay tuned and subscribe to Voxlore so you don't miss the next chapter of this American classic.